Well, thanks so much for joining this evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. If you're here to learn about CI-121, taxes, budgets, and inequality, you are in the right place. I'm Angelina González-Aller. I'm director of the Montana Human Rights Network, and I'm very pleased to be joined by three awesome experts: Howell from Montana Women Vote, Rose Bender from Montana Budget and Policy Center, and Shawn Reagor from Equality Montana for a rolling discussion on current and future budget policy. Before we get into it further and introduce our panelists and their places of work, I'd like to acknowledge that all three organizations here this evening undertake work statewide in Montana. So we are also hopeful that folks from all over the state are able to join us this evening. Montana is the traditional homeland and common hunting grounds of many indigenous peoples, tribes, and clans from time immemorial. Today, Montana is home to approximately 78,000 people of American Indian heritage, many of whom are part of Montana's 12 sovereign tribes: the Salish, Kalispel, Kootenai, Piikani, Chippewa, Cree, Ani, Nin, Nakota, Sioux, Northern Cheyenne, Crow, and Little Shell Chippewa. Those of us who are not Indigenous have a responsibility to acknowledge that we are settlers on this land and take action to advocate for Indigenous sovereignty and liberation. As such, we invite you to take time to research and study the history of the land which you now call home and learn the treaties associated with that place. If you're looking for some guidance on how to do that, there is an excellent worksheet. I'm going to drop it in the chat here in a minute, and we recommend that everyone take time to review it and work on it. I've done this practice several times, and I learn something new every time. Before I turn it over to our panelists, I need to share some norms for this session. We are recording, we will be recording, but we will turn this off during the question and answer component. To that end, we ask you please to submit questions via the Q&A feature. We're going to do our best to keep track of the chat, but that can move very quickly and sometimes questions get lost there. So if you do have a question, please try and direct it to the question and answer feature. I hate to have to do this, but we've learned this the hard way. I do have to say that we will remove folks from the session if they're interfering with the panelists' ability to respond or the learning experience of other attendees. So I hope it doesn't come to that. We're all here to learn. All of our panelists this evening are representing not-for-profit, nonpartisan organizations. As such, we will not be commenting on candidates for office or on other ballot issues. So with that said, I'm very excited to turn it over to our panelists who will self-introduce. Let's let Howell say hello first.
Hey everyone, my name is S.J. Howell. I'm the executive director of Montana Women Vote. My pronouns are they, them. Montana Women Vote is a statewide economic justice organization, and we work primarily with low-income women and families, with trans, non-binary, two-spirit folks and other members of the LGBT community, and with Black, Indigenous, and other people of color in the state. We work on a variety of issues, everything from reproductive health care to the criminal justice reform, and budget and tax policy is a common thread through all of those issues. So I'm super excited to be here tonight.
Thanks, Howell. Glad to have you. Rose.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rose Bender. I'm Deputy Director of Research for Montana Budget and Policy Center. We advance responsible tax, budget, and economic policies through credible research and analysis in order to promote opportunity and fairness for all Montanans. Thanks.
Thanks, Rose. Shawn.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shawn Reagor. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the Director of Equality and Economic Justice with the Montana Human Rights Network. And in that capacity, I'm here tonight to talk about our Equality Montana program, which provides services and support and advocacy opportunities for LGBTQ, and specifically trans, non-binary, and two-spirit Montanans.
Thanks so much, everyone. Let's just dive right in. Can one of you please provide a brief summary of what CI-121 is?
CI-121 amends the Constitution by setting artificially low values for some residential property and capping property taxes at 1% of value, limiting the revenue going to schools, counties, and local governments. So it would reduce property taxes for some homeowners, but not all, making inequitable changes to the system. Those with the highest value properties would see the biggest benefit, to the detriment of schools and local government services.
Thanks, Rose. And so where can we see CI-121? This, from my understanding, this is a ballot issue, correct? That is now in the petition stage. So they are seeking signatures to get onto the November ballot. Is that correct?
That's right.
So CI-121, like most ballot issues that we see, is related to a lot of other policies. Would someone give me a little bit of background on how CI-121 sits in sort of the previous history of legislation and property tax and other budget issues?
So obviously CI-121 and this what I would call ground shift approach to property tax is part of a larger effort to cut revenue and make our tax system inequitable and unfair. This has been going on for a lot of years. I'm going to talk mostly just about the last couple of years, and specifically the last legislative session, where we really saw some big tax cut bills passed and other ideas like this put forth and not pass in the legislature. First and foremost, I will say that in general, low and middle income Montanans do pay a larger share of their income in state taxes than the wealthy and corporations. And it has been that way for a long time, but specifically the last 20 years due to legislative action. And the last year, we saw some big cuts given out specifically to income taxes. SB 159 and SB 399. These are tax cut bills. They're not really important to know the bill numbers, but these both cut taxes for the wealthiest Montanans. First by lowering the top income tax bracket, and then by, under the guise of simplification, eliminating dozens of tax credits and further lowering those top tax brackets. So again, this is an approach that says we want the folks with the most to pay the least, or at the least proportionally in taxes. And overall, we want to limit the amount of tax revenue that the state is bringing in. There are two other bills that I will mention because I think they're pretty related to CI-121. There was one bill that was called a trigger bill, and this is a bill that would have automatically triggered further deep tax cuts if revenue came in higher than anticipated. And this bill died in committee, but the idea behind it was very similar. We're going to cap the amount of revenue the state can collect. This is a idea that is present in CI-121. And I'll just note that we are actually currently in a situation where state revenue has come in higher than anticipated. So we're very grateful for the hard work and advocacy that killed that bill last session. And one last bill that I will mention, this is another one that would have constitutionally limited Montana, the way that Montana collects taxes. This is HB 261. And this would have said that Montana was limited to only two of the three following types of tax: income tax, property tax, or sales tax. So it would have said you can pick two of the three, but you can never have all three at the same time. That's a little bit about what we have seen just in the last couple of years around cutting taxes.
Wow, thanks, Howell. So I'm hearing some common themes about cutting property taxes for some, but not all, and relation to a broader family of bills and policies and proposals that would increase inequity, make the tax system less fair, and also cut funding, incoming revenue that goes directly to usually at the local level services, CI-121 in particular, right? We're talking about schools, transportation, parks, libraries, things of that nature. So that leads me to the question of who's behind CI-121?
Yeah, so we know that there are actually a couple of folks that are originally behind this. One of them is Matthew Monforton. The other is Troy Downing. And then we have some other big players who have been working kind of behind the scenes also in support of this initiative, such as Al Oshesky. So what we know about Matthew Monforton is that he has a history of not just supporting bills that attack our tax system, but we also know that he has a long history of attempting to discriminate against the LGBTQ community and supporting discrimination against the LGBTQ community by claiming religious freedom and exemptions through those organizations. He actually has a history of working with with groups such as the Christian Legal Society that attempt to take student fees from organizations like the University of Montana Law School and then use those fees to discriminate against LGBTQ folks. And then with Al Oshesky, we know that he is at the top of the list for supporting bad issues like this. Not only does he support this issue, but he has a history of supporting issues like the People's Compact and completely trying to undermine tribal sovereignty. He is very, very anti-abortion, very, very anti-reproductive rights. And we even have pictures of him at the Capitol with militia members. And then in addition to that, with Troy Downing, he is the Montana State Auditor. And we know that part of the reason that he supports this initiative and wants to move it forward is because he would benefit so much from it. Specifically because he owns multiple properties across the state of Montana, and just one of those properties is listed at over $1.3 million. So really, the people that are sponsoring these have a history of attacking LGBTQ issues, tribal sovereignty issues, and really trying to undermine the tax system as an opportunity for them to benefit.
Well, that certainly tells me a lot. Thank you for that, Shawn. We got into impacts a little bit, but I think there might be quite a bit more we can untangle there. Let's say that CI-121 did qualify for the ballot and it was passed by the voters in November. What would that mean for state and local governments, let's say?
CI-121 would decimate especially local governments and schools. And like we mentioned before, it alters the Constitution. So this would be a permanent change. And it could result in a loss of up to, we estimate, 265 million annually in state and local government revenue. 235 million of this would be losses to schools and local governments. And then 30 are property tax dollars that currently go to the state, but are used to fund K-12 education. Over 89 school districts across the state, large and small, would see losses in revenue. And this proposal is very similar to one that was passed in California in the 70s, Proposition 13. And after California passed that measure, local property taxes dropped over 60% and school funding fell to some of the lowest in the nation.
So very serious impacts, it sounds like, for schools especially. What about local communities and individuals? What might happen there?
Well, as Rose said, the property taxes targeted by CI-121 largely fund K-12 education. But of course, it's important to think about our budget holistically. If we saw this sort of deep ongoing cuts, we would inevitably have funding shifted around within our state budget, and I think local budgets as well. We know that safety net programs, including at the state level, DPHHS, which runs programs like Medicaid, SNAP, and senior and long-term care, has historically borne the brunt of budget cuts, including budget cuts that we saw in 2017, some of which have never been fully restored. Additionally, cuts like this would make it next to impossible for the state to invest in new programs, new innovations, or new investments in communities, whether we're talking about paid family medical leave or childcare, or making much needed criminal justice reform investments. And I'll stop there.
Well, I'm glad you stopped there because I'm not sure I could take any more bad news. So I'm also curious, this is really brought forward as sort of a, this is going to be such a big break for rising housing prices. But I'm curious if it does anything for housing affordability, which is a very serious issue for folks who are not homeowners. Is there any impact there? Shawn?
So what we actually know is that it will have just the opposite impact and make it more difficult for folks that are trying to find affordable housing. This is especially true for people that are trying to buy their first homes, and for seniors attempting to downsize. Part of the issue with this is that it allows taxes to be reassessed whenever a house is bought or sold. And so that creates a lot of issues for inequality.
So we're not getting cheaper rents with this. Bad news for lots of folks. I heard a little bit about CI-121 being a constitutional amendment. It's my understanding with what happened in California that once this is in the Constitution, it's really difficult to undo. Is that impression correct? Rose, I'm seeing a nod.
Yeah, it is. This isn't the sort of thing that should be in the Constitution. It would be better addressed at the legislative level. And there are actually efforts in the Revenue Interim Committee currently to look at some options for property tax reductions. I mean, this issue has come apart because we have a regressive property tax system. That means that people living on lower incomes are paying a higher percentage of their incomes in property taxes, either as a pass-through as renters or as homeowners. And wealthier people are paying a smaller share, and it's inequitable across the state how it works. So there are options that the state legislature can pass, like refundable property tax credits, which would look at the percentage of your income you're paying in property taxes. And if that was high, you would get a refundable income tax credit. And we have a program like that, the elderly homeowner credit already, but it's obviously by the title, you can tell not everyone is eligible for that program.
Thank you, that's very helpful. So given that we're seeing this particular issue, CI-121, move through the ballot system, I'm curious what we should be watching out for in the November election and the upcoming legislative session, which starts in early 2023.
Like Howell mentioned earlier, this is part of a long effort to cut taxes, and that's going to continue as we move into the 2023 legislative session. There will be pressure for income tax cuts, cuts to the top rate that disproportionately benefit the white and the wealthy in the state. Good things that we could do, we could pass refundable tax credits like the property tax credit I mentioned earlier, or something like a state child tax credit. We saw how the federally funded child tax credit impacted Montana. I mean, it reduced child poverty by a huge amount. You can imagine the impact that could have on a state if it was to continue longer term. Another option is to increase the state earned income tax credit, which provides a refundable income-based tax credit mirrored off the federal. And we have, I believe, the smallest state EITC in the nation. All of these are policies that help people deal with rising prices, which we're all experiencing, including rising prices in housing and childcare.
Thanks, Rose. Howell, Shawn, anything to add there?
Well, I would just say that, as I mentioned before, we are seeing higher than usual revenue, or higher than anticipated revenue coming into the state. And so there will be a narrative around the need to cut taxes to, return this money to taxpayers. I think that it's really important that we reframe this as a need to invest in Montana families and communities. We know the real challenges and the economic burdens that folks across the state are facing, from rising housing prices to inflation and the price of gas and groceries. CI-121 and the other kind of tax cut proposals that we have seen in the legislature do nothing for working Montanans, for low-income Montanans. We need to invest some of the revenue that we have into programs and services that really do support communities. And I will just note that one other thing I think we should be thinking about with this proposal, and as we head in, or this initiative as we head into the legislative session, is that one of the things that inevitably happens when K-12 education funding is gutted is a move towards privatization. And this is something that has been a big part of conservative efforts in the legislature for many, many years. It is also something that has, our public education system is well protected, again, by our Constitution. So when we think about constitutional changes to how education is funded, I think the next thing that we can anticipate is constitutional changes to how education is provided. And that too most directly and deeply impacts low-income and working Montanans, as well as Indigenous folks and folks living in rural communities across the state. So that's something I think we should be thinking about in connection with CI-121 and the folks who are behind it, as well as what we can anticipate in the upcoming session.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things to keep in mind too is that during the next legislative session, we can anticipate a lot of attacks on Montana's Constitution. And what we know is that the Montana State Constitution is actually incredibly progressive, and it's very well written. And so whenever we think about making any changes to that document, it is a very serious proposition and really threatens a lot of the work and a lot of the values that Constitution provides.
Thanks very much. So we heard a little bit about who's behind CI-121, and it's pretty clear that most of the organizations and folks represented here this evening are in opposition to CI-121, but it's my understanding that there's an even broader coalition called Know the Consequences that is organized in opposition to CI-121. Could someone provide just a quick snapshot of what that coalition looks like and who is included in there?
Know the Consequences is a very broad coalition that is opposing CI-121. The groups vary. There are folks all across the board: Montana AFL-CIO, Montana Association of Counties, Bankers Association, Chamber of Commerce, Montana Budget and Policy Center, Montana Women Vote, Rural Education Association, farmers, ranchers, realtors, public employees, the list goes on. And actually, I see someone post something in there. You can click on that link and see very long list of interested parties that are fighting this.
Thank you. So now that we're a little bit more aware of what CI-121 is and what it would do, what can folks do to get involved? Let's talk about maybe short term, in the next month or so. What should folks be on the lookout for?
Yeah, so really important is first and foremost to decline to sign the initiative. So for folks that aren't aware, to be able to qualify this for the ballot to get it on in November, they have to collect a number of signatures from across the state, and a certain percentage of them and a certain percentage of counties. So if and when you see people gathering signatures, make sure you recognize it for what it is and don't sign. And then in addition to that, it's really helpful for us if you just want to note the date and the place where you saw people collecting signatures, and then let us know about that, so that we can make sure that they're collecting signatures in a way that is legal and fair. And we already know that they have been attempting to collect signatures on this issue in ways that are not. So keeping an eye on that and informing us or anyone in the coalition if you notice signature gatherers that where they're at and the day that they're there is really helpful.
Thanks, Shawn. And in the longer term, as part of thanking the panelists this evening, I will say that all three folks here work at fantastic organizations that undertake this work year round. So you can get involved directly by following Montana Women Vote, Montana Budget Policy Center, on social media, signing up for their newsletters, becoming members or donors. Those are great ways to stay in the loop as well. There is also a pledge in opposition to CI-121. I'll drop the link. Oh, it's already in the chat. You can sign this yourself, and you can encourage others to do it as well. In addition to that, we'll reshare the link to the fact sheet from Montana Budget and Policy Center, and you can distribute that as well. Send it to your neighbors, your friends, your family. Make sure that not just you, but everyone in your network knows that this is not something we would like to see on the ballot. And if you're asked on your way out of the grocery store to sign a petition to get something on the November ballot, for everyone to have eyes wide open and know that make sure it's not CI-121 before you put your name down. So with that in mind, I want to open it back up to our panelists for any closing remarks or thoughts. And then we can move on to questions if there are any questions.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate how important it is that we pay attention to what's happening with the budget, and making sure that we have a fair tax policy and resources that support everyone's well-being in the state of Montana, and the ability for everyone to be able to live and be successful in the state. And so not only is it important to keep in mind what's happening with just this initiative, but it's also important to stay connected with us going forward.
Thanks, Shawn. Rose, Howell, any last thoughts?
Just thanks for taking the time to learn about why we're opposed to CI-121, and feel free to reach out if anyone wants more information on it.
Yeah, likewise. Super happy to take questions and discussion if folks have things that are on your mind. And otherwise, thanks for joining.
Great, thanks everyone. So I'm not seeing any questions at this time. We must have answered everything. Unless I've missed any questions in the chat, and I don't think so. I think everyone's pretty satisfied. So with that, I'll remind folks to click on the links now to save them because once we close the Zoom, they will be gone. We've reshared the information sheet, so that's a fantastic resource on this. There's also a lot of information on the Know the Consequences website. That's also where you can find the pledge and the list of organizations and individuals that are in opposition to this particular proposal. If any questions occur, please reach out to any one of these organizations and they can probably answer your question or find the person who can. We thank you so much in joining us in trying to create a more tax equal and fair Montana for everyone that centers and supports working families, individuals, and communities. So thank you all for joining us this evening. I want to give a big silent applause to our panelists and thank all three of these folks for joining us this evening. They're all very busy individuals doing very important work, and I'm very grateful that they were able to make the time this evening to chat about this important issue. So thank you so much, everyone, and reach out if you have any questions.